Members of their leadership have said they cannot support the vile rhetoric and radical proposals of the Republican front runner. Today, we have gathered to ask, since when? Since when have the House Republicans been so concerned about intolerant statements and discriminatory ideas? They appear to be shocked by their candidate, not just the front runner, the presumptive nominee, but all of their candidates. They appear to be shocked by their rhetoric on the campaign trail, but year after year, Republicans have enthusiastically turned their intolerance and their discrimination into legislation. As our video shows that you'll see in a moment, whether it's insulting President Obama, women, immigrants, Muslims, LGBT Americans, there's not a dime's worth of difference between what Donald Trump says and what the House Republicans have been saying all along.
Do you believe we need to go back to surveillance of mosques and certain Muslim groups?
Absolutely, absolutely. He testified, this is back in 1999 and 2000, for the State Department, that he thought over 80% of the mosques in this country were controlled by radical imams. And certainly from what I've seen and dealings I've had, that number seems accurate now.
What we are talking about is a bill that would withhold funds from Planned Parenthood for a period of a year while we have an investigation. Now, I know they've called this a smear campaign.
The incidence of rape resulting in pregnancy are very low.
Going back to the days of the Nazi takeover in Europe, what did they do first? They would call people haters and evil.
For everyone who's a valedictorian, there's another 100 out there that they weigh 130 pounds and they've got calves the size of cantaloupes because they're hauling 75 pounds of marijuana across the desert.
The modern Republican Party is proving to be quite fertile ground for the birther conspiracists. The fledgling birther caucus is headed up, of course, by Representative Bill Posey of Florida. He's sponsor of a bill that would require birth certificates for presidential candidates.
So you accept the fact that he was a born American?
I'm not, no comment.
No comment? In other words, you question the president's legitimacy.
Republicans, in their own words, all we could present to you today is what they had said in an official setting. In another setting, off campus, we will show you what they have said on the campaign trail. In the Republican House, radical attacks, I talked about not a dime's worth of difference between Donald Trump. I said there's not a dime's worth of difference between Donald Trump and the House Republicans, what they say. Attacks on women in the Congress are a dime a dozen. Republicans use taxpayer funds to create a panel to attack women's health and advance a plan of blatant intimidation. They are taking names. They are taking names. You saw the chairwoman of that committee, Congresswoman Blackburn. They are taking names. Does that sound familiar? Republican Trent Franks tries to roll back women's access to comprehensive health care because he thinks rape can't cause pregnancy, and he's a Judiciary Subcommittee chair. Meanwhile, again, Marsha Blackburn says women don't want equal pay, and Speaker Ryan calls Leave for Families an unfunded mandate while he says people should have time to spend with their families, but personally, but not to support it officially. In the Congress alone, the House Republicans have voted 12 times to attack women's health care. And again, Republicans threaten to shut down the entire government just to defund Planned Parenthood and take life-saving preventive care and affordable contraception away from millions and millions of women. They're still on that. This committee, taking names, they're still on that. So it is again, we can only show you some of the statements in this setting. We will show you more in other settings. In the meantime, I want you to yield to the distinguished Democratic whip, Mr. Hoyer.
Thank you very much, Leader. The Republicans have created an environment of radicalism, fear, and exclusion. Their presumptive nominee is the result of their work, and what they have sowed, they are now reaping. Tomorrow, House Republicans will welcome Donald Trump to Capitol Hill, someone who supports legislation to allow businesses to refuse services to LGBT people and their families. Segregation revisited. But this is nothing new, as the leader has said. In fact, House Republicans have been supporting policies that expressly discriminate against Americans based on who they are or who they love. House Republicans spent $2.5 million in taxpayers' funds to defend the Discriminatory Defense of Marriage Act in federal courts, losing every single case, including, finally, at the Supreme Court. They're going to lose their case with the American people in just a few months. Representative Louis Gohmert, who you saw on the television, defended North Carolina's discriminatory law, saying that when he was young, he wouldn't have been able to resist, quote, the temptation to enter a girl's bathroom. Representative Stephen King of Iowa sponsored a resolution in the wake of last year's historic Supreme Court ruling on marriage equality that would have condemned the decision as, quote, unconstitutionally and indefensibly perverting the definition of marriage. And 2 weeks ago, all but 2 House Republicans in the Armed Services Committee voted for an amendment to the Defense Authorization Bill that would overturn President Obama's executive order extending anti-discrimination protections for all LGBT employees of federal contractors. In other words, let federal contractors discriminate. Such statements and actions are not a reflection of what America stands for, but what we've fought against time and time again. The American people don't support policies that discriminate, which is why we're here today to make sure that they know exactly what Donald Trump and House Republicans stand for and have stood for. And I now yield to my dear friend, the Assistant Leader, Jim Clyburn of South Carolina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whip, Madam Leader, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. From day one, Republican leaders and operatives have orchestrated a program of unprecedented disrespect for President Barack Obama. On the evening of his inauguration, they met at a local restaurant to plot their program of undercutting and undermining his authority as President of the United States. And as if on cue, Donald Trump picked up his efforts to lead the birther movement. But he didn't stop with just the birth certificate. He began to raise issues about the president's college transcripts, as if not only to delegitimize him as a president, but to devalue him as a human being. I think that what we have seen in recent weeks has been the culmination of activities which started, Mr. Whip, way back in the 1930s, when this country was trying to recover from the Great Depression. Those programs
that were developed to bring us out of the Depression. Franklin Roosevelt had to succumb to Republican opposition by hanging little tags on CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, WPA, the Work Progress Act Administration, Work Programs Administration. They had a little tag on them of white only. In my part of the country, that continued into the 1940s. And when Strom Thurmond bolted from the Democratic Party in 1948 to form the States' Rights Party over the issue of integrating the armed services. And then we went into the 1950s when we saw the resistance to school integration, when the Supreme Court handed down this Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. Then we came to 1964, when Congress passed the Civil Rights Act. Strom Thurmond and others left the party following Goldwater's admonition in response to his opposition to the Civil Rights Act. And we went forward into the 70s over school integration. This has been building for a long, long time, and the American people should take a look at what has been going on in this campaign and reflect a little bit on our history and ask ourselves, do we want to revisit those days? Do we want to see the pendulum swing so far to the right as to take us back to relive those days? I don't think so. I think the American people will treat this campaign as we've been treating campaigns, that is, a move toward the future. I would hope that we will make Mr. Trump and everybody else understand that this is a country that is moving forward and hopefully learning from its past. And with that, I'd like to yield to our distinguished chair, Mr. Becerra.
Thanks, Jim. I'm the proud offspring of hardworking immigrants. There's a saying in Spanish, tal palo, tal astilla, roughly translated, as is the stick, so is the sliver. Donald Trump is the offspring of Republicans in Congress. When you have Republicans who will describe immigrants as having calves the size of cantaloupe because what they do is they bring drugs across the border, or when you rudely interrupt the President of the United States in the House chamber when he's giving his State of the Union address and shout out, "You lie," when in fact he was telling the truth. When you try to undo a policy that has helped hundreds of thousands of young men and women come out of the shadows and go to school and go to work, and you vote in favor of that, you are no different than the guy who yells out that immigrants are rapists, that they bring crime and drugs to this country. And so you can't try to separate yourself from the stick you come from. And no one should try to distance Donald Trump from the Republicans in Congress. They are one and the same. He is just an offspring of what we've seen over the years coming from Republicans in Congress. And so it's time to change, because if you're a bystander, you're allowing things to happen. And for many people, including me, this becomes very personal because Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress are talking about my parents and about me. And it's time for us to stand up and say, this is not the way you do it, because many of us are very proud of having a rich heritage as the children of immigrants, and we intend to let the country know that we don't stand for those who shout out, "You lie," or describe people as rapists and criminals. We want to let everyone know that we want to give them a place in this country, and that's why it's so important to bring out the true facts about who Donald Trump is. He is the offspring of congressional Republicans. With that, let me yield to the Vice Chair of the Caucus, Joe Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the wake of the San Bernardino attack, we saw a disturbing pattern of violence and outrage against our nation's Muslim American community. When I visited a local mosque in my district to show my support and hear from the community, I was called a traitor on Twitter. I was called un-American. I was told that I should resign. And that's only the stuff I can reveal here publicly and feel comfortable repeating. There was much worse that was said. But that's nothing compared to the student who was bullied on the school bus because of his religion. Or the shop owner in my district in Queens who was savagely attacked by someone who said he hated Muslims. Or the child who asked me at that mosque, why does my country hate my religion? Why does my country hate my religion? When the Republicans hold a vote on the House floor to ban Syrian and Iraqi refugees from entering our country, refugees fleeing unspeakable violence and persecution because of their misguided fear and blatant hate, that's what happens. When Congressman Steve King, a United States congressman, says that Muslim members of Congress refuse to, quote, renounce Sharia law, end quote, or Congressman Louis Gohmert says that, quote, Islam is evil, end quote, that's what happens. When Congressman Peter King of New York holds hearings about Islam and says, and I quote, there are too many mosques in this country, end quote, that's what happens. When their candidate for president, their standard bearer, calls for a ban on an entire religion from our country, that's what happens. Children ask if the United States of America hates their religion. My colleagues on the other side like to puff up their chests and repeat the word freedom over and over again. In fact, they named a caucus after it. But when they not only ignore but blatantly toss aside the very freedom our country was founded on, it makes you wonder who they're really fighting for. They have created their own sty, and now they have to wallow in it. And with that, I yield back to the leader of our caucus, Ms. Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crowley. I thank our members of our distinguished members of the leadership, Mr. Hoyer, for not only his statement today, but his leadership on all of these issues, LGBT among them. Mr. Clyburn, thank you for calling our attention to the birther issue and the tradition that accompanies it. Mr. Becerra, thank you for sharing your personal story of the contribution that immigrants make to America, the constant reinvigoration of our country. Mr. Crowley, thank you for sharing the sad tale of what is happening in your district when you spoke out and demonstrated your support for Muslims. And I will add to what you said about Peter King. Peter King was the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, and he said, this is the enemy living among us, when he referenced the Islamic community in our country. Rules of the House prevent us from showing you a side-by-side and some of the egregious remarks made by our members, not in official setting. But we will have that another day with some other members, including the leadership, in another setting, a political setting, because they deem that to be political if we were to show Donald Trump's words here. But if you saw a side-by-side, you'd see his birther remarks and their birther remarks, his anti-Muslim remarks and their building walls to Muslims, to immigrants, to the rest. The list goes on. You know it. You could put this piece together yourselves. But to help you along and encourage that, we wanted to present some of the facts to you. Some of the nighttime comedy shows have done a good job of doing the side-by-side. Hopefully the traditional press will do that as well. Any questions? Yes, sir.
All your examples aside, you know, there's hardly a universal embrace of Trump among Republicans on Capitol Hill, to the point that Speaker Ryan made the remarkable step of not endorsing him last week. Does that at least hearten taking that step and calling for more civility, softening of the tone, and that sort of thing with Trump?
I think you missed my point. My point was, since when? Since when are is the Republican leadership in this House appalled by anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-LGBT, anti-Barack Obama, anti-women comments made by their members in official? Donald Trump is a candidate. These people have power. They are chairs of committees and chairs of subcommittees. They bring their vitriol into the form of legislation and to the floor to build walls, to block immigrants, to block Muslims coming into our country. So our point is, since when all of a sudden is this very same rhetoric appalling to the Republican leadership and some of the Republican establishment when this happens every day here on the floor, in committee, in press conferences, in an official way, and certainly out on the campaign trail. We can't do the campaign trail here. We can't even do the Trump campaign trail here. But we will do that in another setting to facilitate for the public an understanding of the connection between the two. Any comments on, do we feel better about them doing what? Having a meeting tomorrow?
Do you think Ryan's position was strictly political and that he doesn't really?
I have no idea what his position is, but I do know this.
Well, his position is that he hasn't endorsed the nominee for president.
And our position is, why? Is it some of the things have been said is that this is great because this is a rejection of the vitriol of Donald Trump on the campaign. But it's not a rejection. They never said boo. They never said boo when their members were saying this every day. So our point is, what has happened in this campaign is Donald Trump has pulled back the veil. What he says is what they say. And now people can see the connection between them. And unless the Republican leadership is going to be as, shall we say, critical of their own members for what they say as they are of Donald Trump, it's all a show. Any other comments?
Let me just add that a meeting tomorrow will not change the environment that has been created over decades, as Mr. Clyburn pointed out. And we will see what Mr. Ryan ultimately does. Nice words are nice. Action of rejecting exclusion and prejudice and radicalism is what, however, the country needs.
Any other comments?
I would just make one other point. I think the young guns and their obsession for power, they've created their own mess. They've created their own style, as I mentioned before. Now they have to wallow in it. They're responsible for the fundamentally right lean within their own caucus today, and now it's coming home to roost. So as the leader has said, and consistently over and over again, are they surprised that their presidential standard bearer is saying the same thing that they've been saying consistently over the last 5 or 6 years? They've been in the majority, even before that? How can they be, and going back to 1948 when the full change really started, but really coming to fruition now, are they really that shocked? Is Mr. Ryan really that appalled and shocked by Mr. Trump? What he is saying is a mirror image of what they've been saying, not in a mirror, but to the American people over and over again, about Muslims, about Mexicans, about the LGBT community, about women in this country. It's not new. The rhetoric is on the floor, and it's on the campaign trail, as the leader has said, and she and we will expose that in the near future as well.
Let me say this. I didn't want to prolong this in my statement. Let me take you back to the beginning of the 1960s. Forget 1948. At the beginning of the 1960s, the Republicans kicked off their campaign to begin with Goldwater, opposition to the Civil Rights Act. That was the foundation upon which he built his campaign. If you go to the 1970s, Richard Nixon built his campaign on what he called a Southern strategy, which he rode into the presidency. If you go to the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan left his convention, newly nominated to be the presidential standing bearer for the Republicans. Where was his first speech? He went straight to Philadelphia, Mississippi. What is Philadelphia, Mississippi known for? That's where those 3 civil rights workers were murdered. His first speech as a nominee was in Philadelphia, Mississippi in 1980. So when you see this kind of foundation being laid over time, I'm not surprised to see that Donald Trump has decided that this is the way to become president of the United States.
Well, it may be the way to be the nominee, but it's not going to be the way to be president of the United States. And what we hope to do is take this to a place where we can review the past, witness what has happened so far, but understand that the country has moved on. Mr. Trump has won a percentage of a percentage, but I believe that the American people have moved on from this age of discrimination. Yes, sir.
Hi, I wanted to ask
I didn't think we had any more.
the Quinnipiac poll results show Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton in the deadbeats in Florida, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. Are you concerned that Donald Trump is appealing to Democratic voters? And if so, how would you explain that?
Well, I think that we've seen, even since those polls came out, that they have boiled in too many white voters into the sample. I'm not a big fan of the polling that is going on. As a matter of fact, it's tilted toward a person like me, white and older, rather than what the actual electorate will be. I feel very proud of both of our candidates for president, Bernie Sanders and, of course, Hillary Clinton. They have, through their ideas, attracted people to their campaigns. I have no doubt that we will have a Democratic president. I take nothing for granted, and I want the public to be sure to know what is at stake in the election. And I hope that with your help, this can be elevated to a debate that is worthy of the office of president, worthy of our founders, worthy of the American people, about a debate on ideas and not vitriol and character assassination and issues that are irrelevant to working people's lives, about trickle-down versus middle-class economics. And I think that some of this is a distraction from the fact that the Ryan budget is a road to ruin instead of a path to prosperity, which our Democratic budget is, and we hope to focus on that. Even the road to ruin that it is has not been able to get the votes in his own caucus. So there's a lot going on there. But our purpose here today, and we can do it better in a non-official setting, is to show you a split screen of what Donald, I think of him as Ronald McDonald, I don't know why.
Wonder why.
Donald Trump.
McDonald Trump.
Donald Trump on one side and members of the House here. And don't you wonder why and since when all of a sudden are the Republican establishment is appalled by the comments of what Donald Trump is saying, when it's what we hear here every day. One more question, just one more, this one. Okay.
House Natural Resources said that it was going to release a bill today, and it seems that it's been delayed. What's the holdup, and are you still optimistic that something can get done before July 1st, given that it seems like this is the fourth time now that we're going back to the drawing board?
Yes, as I've said before, I believe that everyone is operating in good faith to get a bill done. We were disappointed that the bill we saw yesterday wasn't something that we could support, and so another few days of back and forth, I think, will produce something that we can take to the floor. It absolutely must happen, and we have to have it in a bipartisan way for the restructuring that does the job, with a board that can follow through, and in a way that helps grow the economy of Puerto Rico and helps the people there.
So by the end of the week, you're thinking maybe something?
What's today, Wednesday? Hoping maybe by Friday so that we can have something for next week. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Stay tuned. screen.